On today's show, Victor Wembanyama, Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson, the Thompson twins, who were the NBA's biggest winners and losers 2023 NBA draft night. What was the biggest draft night surprise? We're going to break it down for you coming up right here at Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know that the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Joining us now is one of the hosts of the Locked On NBA, a big board podcast, Leif Thulin, who you can track down wherever you listen to your podcast. And on YouTube, just search Locked On NBA, a big board. And Leif, we had the NBA draft, 2023 NBA draft take place, and it's the night where dreams are made. These kids, these young men who have been working their whole lives to make it to the NBA, they get drafted. And we're going to talk about the winners and the losers of this most recent NBA draft. Let's start, though, first with the biggest draft night surprise, which I think I know what it is, but I want to know what was the biggest draft night surprise in your eyes this time around.
Just how far Cam Whitmore fell. I mean, I could be creative about it, but for someone that had Cam Whitmore as high as 4, I ended with him at number 5 in my big board. It seemed like, okay, maybe the rumors say he falls to 9, maybe he falls to 11, but to 20. And just how dramatic that fall was as the broadcast kept going on, you could see the panning to him in the green room, and you just kind of think, okay, something's clearly more wrong than even the rumors of people who caught wind of what's wrong knew, and it makes you just unbelievably curious. But I think that has to take the cake as the biggest surprise, because this guy was billed as a top 5 talent. And as you're keenly aware, the Rockets were considering him at 4, and then they got him at 20.
Yeah, the Rockets were definitely really impressed with him. And the Rockets actually, when it comes to their medical staff and everything, they tend to be one of the more conservative teams in the NBA. So for them to still want to move forward with him at 20, even after all these other teams passed on him, what I'm starting to kind of understand about that situation is that it was maybe less so about the physicals and the concerns there, although that might still be a concern to pay attention to, is that it was more so about just how he interviewed, right? His personality, some of that stuff. And the interview process, we saw the same thing happen last year with Tari Eason, and one of the reasons that he fell all the way to 17, and Houston scooped him up, and then he had a fantastic rookie season. Do you think this is one of those situations, Leif, where maybe teams just kind of overthought things as far as like the interview process, or maybe he didn't blow them away, with that element of the pre-draft process, and teams kind of overthought things?
I think that certainly had to play a factor. I think a large portion was concerns about his high school knee injuries and what it meant for his health down the road. And then I heard a rumor, I don't know exactly how true this is, that his coach at Villanova, Kyle Neptune, who is a rookie head coach at Nova, and him had some difficulties with one another. And so I figure that all factors in it. And as for Tari Eason, he was someone that I had higher on my big board as well last year. And I was surprised he fell to as far as he did, but this is nothing compared to the fall that seemed almost astronomical that Whitmore had on Thursday night.
All right, well, then let's get to we'll start with the biggest winners of draft night. It's pretty easy to point to the San Antonio Spurs. They kind of became the biggest winners the moment they won the NBA draft lottery. But how do you kind of pick apart who walks away from this draft feeling the best with the outcome of how the night went?
I would say the whole state of Texas did a great job. I mean, you look at the Spurs, Wembanyama, and I think C.D. Sissoko is a first-round talent they got in the second round as well. And obviously Wembanyama generates the headlines, and deservedly so. As for the Rockets, they got two players that I had 4 and 5 on my big board at number 4 and at number 20. So that's a win. And then the Mavericks, they came away with the players that you would anticipate that they would get in Derek Lively. Like that made sense what was going to happen. If they take him at 10, they trade down, get him at 12. They get off of Bertans' contract, which was a terrible one. And then you get Olivier Maxence Prosper and Rashawn Holmes, and swallow a little bit of a contract in Holmes. And so I think that was, both from a perspective of personnel and just being savvy with the cap, that was a big win. And then, I mean, like we said, the Spurs is easy. Like, you just got Victor Wembanyama. So Texas becomes the winner for me.
Okay, so all three Texas teams walk away with their heads held incredibly high. I know we talked about Cam Whitmore there a moment ago. Is there any prospects that went a lot higher than you anticipated them to go in this year's draft?
I wouldn't say anyone that went super high in the draft itself stood out to me. I think Jaime Jaquez, who went 18, if you'd told me he was going 18 a week before it happened, I would have been pretty shocked, but I heard pretty strong rumors about a day or two before that the Heat wanted him at 18. So my actual shock was low when it happened, but like, if you'd talked to me throughout the process, that one would have stunned me.
Okay, and when we flip the script here and we take a look at some of the teams that maybe walk away a little bit more disappointed, right? Some of the losers of the draft. I always struggle trying to maybe identify losers of the draft, because it feels like teams generally kind of walk away with the guys that they have, best available on their board. But who would you think, is maybe a little bit upset? Maybe a guy went just before they were on the board, that kind of thing.
I think one draft, and I don't know exactly how their boards looked out, but one that puzzled me would be what the Magic did. They went for 2 fits, but I feel like they came away without the ceiling that they may have wanted in drafting 6 and 11. They do have their transcendent franchise-altering star, which is what I try to look for when I'm drafting high, and they have it in Banchero, and they have a Robin and Franz Wagner. They're well off. And they're redundant everywhere else. So Anthony Black, you could point to, like, hey, they already have Suggs, who is a similar ilk of player, and he didn't work out. So maybe this is, you can make some excuses. So Anthony Black was the favorite at 6. So I have no true qualms with that. I had number 8 on my board. But then Jet Howard at 11, reaching for a shooter who defensively is limited. That one puzzled me just a little bit, because Jet Howard's had some ankle issues. Defensively was very poor, and shooting, he's really good. But I thought there was better value to be had at 11, and that may just have to be something with my draft philosophy, where I look for upside more so than fit, especially in that range.
And we saw, all the debate leading up to the draft was, what are the Hornets going to do? Ultimately, that's where the draft starts at pick number 2, with Victor Wembanyama being the consensus number 1 guy. So much debate between Scoot Henderson, Brandon Miller, back and forth. And it seemed like the Hornets were really ultimately torn on it. Throughout the process, though, it kind of felt like Brandon Miller was going to be the guy. Are you at all surprised that they went Brandon Miller? How heavily do you think the Hornets were actually considering going Scoot Henderson there at number 2? And how do you like the fit of Brandon Miller in Charlotte?
I personally would have taken Scoot Henderson, just because I think he's the more unbelievable talent. But I think all indications throughout the draft process, up until like the day of and the day before, where the betting lines shifted, said that it was going to be Brandon Miller. And I think the Hornets stuck to their guns. And I think from a fit perspective, it makes more sense to put a small forward, someone that can play 2 through 4 in Brandon Miller and be a scorer next to LaMelo Ball. Makes more sense than putting someone who's a point guard with a point guard in LaMelo Ball. And then the rest of their draft, I think they got a lot of talent. Like Nick Smith entering this draft cycle was supposed to be the top college basketball player. I personally have never been horribly high on Nick Smith, but to get him at 27, talent wise, is a win. Amari Bailey was a 5-star recruit at UCLA, another guy that I've never personally thought was as highly, I've never thought of as highly of as maybe the consensus has, but to get him where they got him is very impressive. And then James Najee is a freak of nature that they got at 31. So I would say the Hornets should be happy with the talent they accumulated in the draft, but let's see how it pans out. And it'll always be regarded as a miss should Scoot Henderson be better than Brandon Miller, which is what I perceive him to be. And so maybe it'll be unfair, but you know what? Maybe if you hit it off perfectly and they're still an all-time great like Hakeem Olajuwon, you don't think of it as a miss when Michael Jordan went in 3.
The NBA announced the Summer League schedules. We've got Spurs, Hornets, and then Blazers, Rockets are two of the first marquee games tipping off Summer League this summer. Which of those two games are you most looking forward to seeing? Wemby versus Brandon Miller or Scoot Henderson versus Amin Thompson?
It's a good question. I would have loved to see Wemby versus Scoot, but the appeal for Wemby versus Brandon Miller is a little less for me. So I'll go with Scoot and Amin Thompson just because I think positionally they'll match up against each other more, and that's more intriguing to me than watching one where it's just the 1 and 2 pick. But I'll be watching both. I mean that's the stuff I do. I love the draft. I love watching these type of things. And then the Utah Summer League, which is where I live, is happening before that, and so I don't know if Wembanyama is going to play, but I hope he does. And then there's some high picks in that regard. Like the Jazz have 3 first-round picks. The Thunder come to town, have Cason Wallace coming through, and then the Grizzlies are the other team, and they've got talent like G.G. Jackson went 45th, which I thought was super low, but I think he's a first-round talent. So there is talent coming through there. So I'm excited to see all these players, but I would answer with Scoot and Amin if I was forced to choose.
How will these drafted talents ultimately pan out at the NBA level? You're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On NBA Big Board. Leif, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Awesome. Anytime.